Welcome everyone to the games people play.
Looking for a redirect, but loose in front of the goal.
Does anything in particular stand out? Is there any?
Run it for the end zone for the touchdown.
This is Bernie Corbett saying, play the game well. Hello everyone and welcome to the games people play with Bernie Corbett. I'm Bernie Corbett. I'm still Bernie Corbett, even though we're now 7 episodes. This is season 1, episode 7 of the games people play. Once again, we're back at the Fours, America's #1 sports bar and restaurant. And once again, if you're in Boston, please stop by the Fours. You'll thank me for that. Great menu, also available for takeout, and right across from the historic TD Garden here in the north end of Boston. And they've been our hosts, and we thank Peter Colton and Jim Taggart and Gino and all the good folks here for hosting us in this shrine to sports, not just Boston sports, but shrine to sports in general. Thus, the fact that they were voted #1 in the nation, not just in Boston, here at the Fours Sports Bar and Restaurant. Also, our good friend Kirsten Kelly, and thank you to Kirsten for everything she's done to help our program. And once again, if you're looking for a pro athlete or current personal appearance, sales presentation, trade show, corporate appearances, Kelly will help you out. Kelly Sports and Consulting. They're there at 781-888-2791, or you can check her out on Facebook at Kelly Sports and Consulting. And once again, thank you to Kirsten Kelly for all her help. And also to our good friend Phil Castanetti at Sports World, New England's largest sports memorabilia shop since 1986. At 87 Broadway, that's Route 1 for the locals in Saugus, Mass. Thank you to the inimitable Phil Castanetti. And as we get to our guest, we want to let you know that today's episode is also presented by and in conjunction with our guest. And our guest today, many will remember from the tennis world back, it's been a while since she was on the court, attaining #2 in the world status at the time. We're very pleased to have with us Andrea Jaeger, and an opportunity for Andrea to tell her story. And once again, in the spirit of the games people play, it is on the field, on the court, on the ice, but also in life. And it is a remarkable story, and we're looking forward to being able to tell it here today with Andrea. And Andrea, her Little Star Foundation is our presenting sponsor. She founded the Little Star Foundation, and she'll be able to tell us about that. And Andrea gave all of her pro tennis earnings to help children with cancer and children in need. The Little Star Foundation is celebrating its 35th year in 2020. Donating to make a difference, you can go to www.littlestar.org. And without further ado, we bring in from Florida, Andrea Jaeger. Welcome, Andrea. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. Wow, what a history! Just where you're at right now, and wow, I'm like honored.
Well, we'd love to have you up here sometime if you get to Boston, and of course, everything is relative in the time of the pandemic. We asked our guests if you get to Boston. Most of our guests are like, "I'd like to get to anywhere," so Boston would qualify. But if you get to Boston, we'll take care of you here at the Fours, and you'll have a great time with us. And hopefully that'll happen sometime in the future. But just to remind everybody, as I mentioned, Andrea attained the status of #2 in the world of women's tennis, retired very abruptly after injuries took their toll, particular debilitating shoulder injury, 7 subsequent surgeries, and retired officially in 1987. And since then, she has been on a little bit of a different track with her life, as we will be able to recount in detail here today. Andrea, once again, we like to tell the story in full here in the games people play. And for your story in full, we go back to the suburbs of Chicago, Lincolnshire, Illinois, and your early time in the game of tennis, going all the way back to when you began at the age of 8. What was life like for you in the home in conjunction with your tennis career early on, as you recall and you remember it? How did you come to the game that you played?
Well, I had a fantastic upbringing with tennis, and I was fortunate because both my parents loved playing tennis. My dad learned how to play from watching Borg and Connors and McEnroe on TV, and so my mom and I, my both my parents got together and finally said, "Okay, let's let Susie play." My sister was 3 years older, and she started playing with them, and I was just sitting around at the court saying, "When can I play?" And finally, I received a like a set to play in my backyard with, just not even a tennis set, just like, back and forth with a few kids in the backyard. And we just had these little tiny rackets with little birdies and we're just hitting back and forth. And my dad said, "Okay, I think it's time for you to come play." But he would not let me on a tennis court. He said, "You have to learn how to hit a ball first in the driveway." And he never thought I would get anywhere in tennis because he tossed balls to me and I missed and missed and whiffed and missed and whiffed for quite some time. And finally, when I struck the ball, it was magical. It was so exciting. And then we went on a tennis court in our local community. And after that, it was just pretty much a meteor rising in the sense of in junior tennis. I played my first tournament at age 9, won that. I was winning collegiate, pro, and under 21 and 18 under tournaments at the age of 13 and 14. And then I turned professional at age 14. And at 16, I was 2 in the world. And I don't think that happens. That rise doesn't really happen in sports, certainly in whether it's a team or individual sport. So I was very fortunate because it was a fun upbringing in sport. It wasn't as if my goal was to be number 1 in the world. My goal was, hey, I hope I get to play with my parents and sister on the local tennis courts. And so fun and just family enjoyment was so much a part of that for a great deal of time.
And you had to earn your way on from an early age in terms of being able to get tennis lessons. And one of the things that I noted was hitting in the garage. You'd bundle up, you'd hit in the garage, and the oil spots on the wall were the telltale that you were practicing, and that you could show your dad, "Hey, I'm practicing. Give me those lessons. I want to join my sister now."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember sitting there, and I think that with athletes that love the game for life, I'm certainly one of them. You just have a passion and you have a love and appreciation of it. And so for me, I would sit in the garage and hit against the wall for hours. It didn't matter to me. I loved training. I loved every part of that aspect of the discipline and the fortitude and the tenacity. And that really benefited me later on. And it's something that helps tremendously because when you become a professional athlete or in any sport, there's parts where you just have to wake up and do the same thing over and over and do it better each day. And that discipline does help. So if you have the passion for it, it makes it that much more enjoyable. You see that with Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. They love the game and it exudes from them. And that's something, it's a gift to be able to have that.
Your parents were German immigrants, and your dad had a sports competitive background in boxing. Fought 69 times as an amateur, only lost 3 times. Not a bad record, 66-3. He had some success in boxing. You mentioned how he came to the sport of tennis. What about the mentality or cementing the mentality, that competitive drive with you and your father's influence? He coached locally and brought players in from miles around to his tennis facility. What about his influence on you and how he instilled that in you?
Well, I'm impressed. No one's ever known his bout record or his history like you have. I've never been interviewed like that before. And it's an important point because my dad, he did have that background. He used to take me to all kinds of boxing fights, like in arenas where it was closed circuit. And so I saw the greats. And Ray Leonard, and he would tell me, how to position your feet. And it wasn't like I was ever going to grow up and be a boxer, but he wanted me to learn sports. He just loved the athletic part of it. And so he had a tremendous eye. There's some parents that are coaches, but they don't have an eye or the instinct of how to coach well. My father was incredible. He was one of the best coaches I've ever known for especially for young kids, but also for people that were playing competitive junior and pro tennis. He was just very talented. He literally could tell me, he would watch people play through the whole tournament, but he would tell me to go on the court, and he goes, if you hit 3 balls to their forehand and 1 to their backhand, they'll miss. They'll miss that backhand. And sometimes I just did it to go, this can't be possible. And I do it, and the person would miss. He would be absolutely right. So now, analytics and computerization and coaches and teams of people are coming in. My dad was doing that before just with his mind. He had a very methods analyst, system analyst kind of mindset. And I know that definitely helped me in tennis.
And he was your coach, really your only coach, really, as a driving force from an early age. You had some other coaches on the periphery, I'm sure, but your dad was always there for you as a consistent influence.
Right. He was definitely my coach the whole time. There's oftentimes he'd try to bring in someone that maybe was just had retired from the men's circuit or was a competing partner. But my dad's influence, and because I knew of his ability, I trusted him the most because he put the time in. I mean, he would literally at our tournaments, he would sit and watch all the other matches. And I mean, what is he going to do anyway? I mean, you're sitting at a hotel, you're at a tennis tournament, but he loved the game. He taught me how to swing the ball out of the air like Jimmy Connors did, that swinging volley. I was one of the first on the women's circuit to do that. Something that Andrea Jaeger did so much in his career later on. He taught me like service motion, the copy of Von Lendl on some things and his forehand. I mean, he would literally see what would be a better way to perform and teach me, and it worked. And that's what I think is important. A lot of parents, a lot of people want to help their kids, but they're not necessarily the smartest fit, whereas my father was actually the smartest fit.
And a lot of those tournaments that you traveled to, you had your sister Susie. She was a couple of years ahead, but she'd be competing in those tournaments in a different age group. And there was always the family van. The van went everywhere. You were like, on tour in the van, and a lot of miles covered in the van. So a lot of time to talk tennis, and a lot of camaraderie and family time and bonding with your sister. I'm sure you two were very close.
Yeah, I was very fortunate, and I think any younger sibling has a blessing to have someone that's older, that is already worked hard or trained hard or plays to discipline, because you will automatically, the younger sibling will automatically be better because you're playing with someone that's stronger, older, wiser, more experienced. And so my sister didn't have that advantage. She didn't have someone older than her. She played with my parents, obviously. But for me, I always was able to play with someone that was stronger and older and better. And I think when you're doing that at age 8, when I started 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, those are very formative years. And that helped me. So by the time I went and played in the older age groups at, 21 and under and the pro tournaments, and I started winning those as an amateur, it wasn't that unusual for me to play with someone that was older, bigger, stronger, because I had that growing up.
Well, you certainly did. And I don't know if you recall, there was a reference to, in terms of the affluence of some of the players that you compete against at the junior level that had advantages, that were coming from a different economic circumstance. They'd come in the BMWs and the Mercedes, and the trophies would leave in the van.
Yeah, you're right. Again, there's some things that, whether God set them up or the stars lined you up. We had just a great fortune with, I wore my sister's hand-me-downs in playing junior tennis and used her racket hand-me-downs. But Wilson was based in Chicago, and Wilson saw my sister and I firsthand. They didn't have to travel the country. They saw us at the local level in Chicago, and they immediately gave us rackets and saw our promise and saw our talent. And that was a huge difference. I mean, to have a racket that you knew if the strings broke, you actually got strings, or if your racket broke, or wore out, because we weren't the kind that slammed our rackets down or anything like that. But we had someone that would invest in our equipment. And then Fila came around when I was a junior and said, they saw me win the Orange Bowl and they saw me play other tournaments and said, we'd like to give your family clothes. That was huge because my parents were counting. I remember them counting quarters on the table just to see if we were going to be able to make it to indoor tennis. So, thankfully, those two companies came through for us because we didn't have, like now you have the USTA development system, and a lot of countries have very good development systems. That didn't happen back then. We didn't have any financial support getting us to tournaments. My dad would work all day, get in the van and drive at night to get us to, say, New York to play the Easter Bowl, or get us to Miami to play the Orange Bowl. So he wouldn't sleep and drive us across country at night and then be ready for us to, he sacrificed a lot. Both my parents sacrificed a lot so we could get somewhere. But as he always said, my dad always said, I want my daughters to play tennis so they can do something together, but also so they can stay off the streets. So they won't get in trouble. They'll be too tired to get in trouble because they'll be doing something that they love doing. And that, that was just some of those things. When you piece those little important parts together, a champion is made, I think, obviously with hard work, but it's also made of heart and sacrifice of several people and people who step up. And I had that fortune going for me as well.
You mentioned about your dad, and he owned a bar on the north side of Chicago. I've been in a few bars on the north side of Chicago. What was the name of the bar? You remember, Andrea?
Yeah, the Postilion Lounge. It was a restaurant bar. It was a great place. They played like European music, served European food. They opened on weekends. I would serve as a little kid. I had to stand on this big box just to look over the counter. I take people's orders, and I was like, 7, 8 years old. I never got them right. I mean, they'd ask for a hamburger, I'd get them a hot dog, and they all ate it. But it was a great place. He loved it. Both my parents worked there, and they just loved that.
I don't know what time last call was, but I can picture your father, being able to clean up, lock up. 2 a.m. last call, 4 a.m. last call in Chicago, and then all of a sudden he's jumping in the van and he's driving, as you said, to New York for the Easter Bowl tournament. So it was quite a demanding, rigorous lifestyle.
Yeah, he had a call handle on his CB called Night Owl, and it was Night Owl because he did so much of for us to get us to places at night. I mean, there's be days he'd get home at 4 or 5 in the morning and then wake up to take us to the courts at 5:30 in the morning so we could play 6 to 7 before school. And then he'd teach all day to help, with us being able to get free court time. And then he'd play with us again in the afternoon. So, and my mom worked as well. She worked at a beauty shop, a salon, while she was still working at the Postilion Lounge.
You competed in junior tournaments and became a dominant player in your age group from very early on. What about the decision to turn pro at 14, going on 15 at the time? What do you remember about that decision, and how you felt about it at that time, and what maybe you knew about it at that time? I mean, you're relatively innocent and probably we're not thinking about it as much, but what are your thoughts as you think back about that time?
Well, I was always very involved in my career from the beginning, and my parents wanted it that way. I wanted it that way. And I remember at 14, and it was at 13, 14, I started winning pro tournaments. I mean, I'd literally be invited I'd go play pre-qualifying, qualifying, and main draw and win. One tournament, I won 13 matches in a row and won the tournament. And we never got the prize money. We had all the expenses to travel to the tournament. My sister and I would stay at housing a lot to save expenses. And so I saw all this money going out for my career, to fly to places, to pay for court time, all these expenses going out. And I'd win these tournaments that gave money, but I couldn't take it because I was an amateur. And so my decision process was, that was certainly a factor, but more so was a factor was I was getting, juniors was boring to me. I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful to junior tennis, but when you win your age group, my dad had to start doing incentives. Like, if you win this tournament and you win some sets 6-0, I'll take you bowling. Or if you have a golden set where you don't lose a point, I'll take you to the zoo. So he had to start doing these things because junior tennis became so easy for me. And then when we actually had the meeting to sit down, and I had won a couple of pro tournaments in a row, one in South Africa and one in Las Vegas, my dad, our whole family was there with the agent. And I remember them specifically saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, I can't really go back to juniors. I mean, what am I going to do? Repeat what I've just done? I'm 14, and that's something that is a very, it's a decision that was very easy for me. The one aspect that I was concerned about is school. Because I was going to be a professional tennis player, I could no longer play on a college team. And my parents and my sister and my sister won state in Stevenson High School 3 years in a row. And I wanted to play high school tennis 1 year for my high school. And I wanted to play that with her. And so we did that. But I knew college tennis would be out. So that was one deciding factor. And my parents didn't have enough money to send us to college. And so when it came down to the decision, my dad looked at me and said, Andrea, if you do well in the pro circuit, you can pay to go to college. You don't have to, you get a scholarship. You can help, go by yourself. You can pay for your college tuition. My sister received a scholarship to Stanford University. So she was that. So basically that decision, which you think would be, monumental, wasn't that monumental. It was very easy because my talent had drove it. I was already becoming someone that was a threat in pro tennis, and I wasn't even a pro. And then, we had already decided that I love tennis. I wanted to be challenged more. And so that was something that was really important to do. And so for me, it was that decision. I had, again, however God gifts your gifts. I grew up never getting nervous on a tennis court, never getting tired, and never getting hot. And I don't know, part of it was my training and discipline, because I would look at certain qualities and go, well, that's not useful, so why have it? So for me, the pressure of being a pro tennis player never occurred to me. It never did, because there was none. There was none to go do that. So for me, that was a completely different set of qualifications than somebody else might have. So I had an easier place in making that decision and was involved in it from the very beginning.
Well, after winning 13 national junior titles, I guess it made sense that you weren't going to be able to. It would have been a big step back as opposed to a step forward. But that particular step forward, 1980, and you become the youngest player ever seeded at Wimbledon at 15 years, 19 days. And I went back and I was particularly interested in the match that you played in the quarterfinals against Virginia Wade. And my goodness, as someone that's got some working knowledge of the sport, not only are you 15 years, 19 days turning pro and the youngest at Wimbledon, but you're going to play Virginia Wade, 20 years your senior. And as they say in England, our Ginny. You're playing. But talk about the ultimate road game for anybody to play Virginia Wade at Wimbledon, the darling, the Queen of England on the court. What about that experience? I watched some of that match and was just fascinated by the dichotomy of you at 15 playing her in later in her career. What do you remember about that match and just the aura of that experience?
Well, it's interesting because, again, you're like a data analyst. They need to get you on the virus or something, because the way you assimilate data and process it, I mean, my gosh, you could do great.
I lead a very sheltered life, actually.
But that match, I do remember specifically because she had won Wimbledon. So for everyone in England, they were so excited, and she was, held in such high regards. But again, when I competed in pro tennis, I never was nervous. When I went out, I knew that my training and the way I approached my matches, I knew that every match I played, I could go win. It was just, that's my train of thought. And so when I went out to play, I just knew my game was very well suited, even though I didn't grow up on grass like she did, to play her and beat her. And so it was the thing that I remembered most about the match. I wasn't surprised that I won because I expected to. What I was surprised was the crowd at Wimbledon was they were just amazing in terms of how they approached applauding for both players. Because they love, we see with Coco Gauff now, they love youngsters that come in and do well and fight and try. But I was playing their hero. And yet when I won a point, I was prepared to never have any kind of applause, or I was prepared to have the whole arena against me. And it wasn't like that at all. It was a very, the crowd was for both of us. They were so respectful. I mean, it's just, I've gone, every time I go back and play Wimbledon Legends, or I'm like even today, my Wimbledon shirt on. But when I go back, I always help their kids, whether they're in hospitals or schools, disabled kids, challenged kids, blind children, children with cancer. I've always had a heart as well for them, because when I was a kid, they made me as one of their own. And that's a pretty special circumstance.
I'm glad you gave me the eyewitness account, because when I watched the highlights, it was probably about a 15 to 20-minute package from that match. It was very respectful. I thought it would have been a lot more one-sided, and would have been a road mentality for you and the wolves at the door, but it wasn't. They were very respectful, and it was relatively equal in terms of the applause and the support for both players. That's really a testament to the fans of Wimbledon, who aspire to be, and I think live up to being, the best in the world of tennis.
They have such a love and appreciation and respect for the history and the game of tennis, and they appreciated my try and my effort. And it was, I've always had that rapport with Wimbledon. They've always supported me, but it was extraordinary, because it was as if when I won, they stood for me as much as they would have stood for her upon winning that match. And it says something about, why Wimbledon is Wimbledon. I mean, certainly for that as well.
Another match from Wimbledon, and then this will get into a larger question that I have about you fitting in, or attempting to fit in on the women's tennis tour at such a young age. You defeated Billie Jean King at Wimbledon in her last appearance at Wimbledon. In semifinal, it was the last match, and it was her most lopsided loss at Wimbledon in her entire career. Your memories about that, the fact that you literally and figuratively knocked off the king, the queen, the king, in that match. I mean, once again, extraordinary for somebody I believe you were 17 at the time, 17 or 18 at the time that you played in that particular Wimbledon.
Yeah, so that was a different match. I didn't know she was retiring after Wimbledon. I knew it after her press conference. But when we walked out, I mean, she was obviously, I was fortunate to have grown up in an era of Billie Jean King, Chris Everett, Martina Navratilova, Tracy Austin. I mean, the three pillars of Chris and Martina and Billie Jean, they made women's sports. They didn't just make women's tennis, they made women's sports. And I think every athlete owes an appreciation to them. But I also, I kind of came from the mentality, when you talk about fitting in, I also came from the mentality that you mentioned this on your broadcast at the beginning. This isn't just about the sport, it's about life. And I looked at people as what kind of person they were as a whole, not what kind of athlete they were. Because for me, playing tennis was easy. I mean, I had a gift for it, obviously, but what kind of character are you? What kind of character do you have inside of you? And so when I played Billie Jean, I remember that she was shocked. Every changeover, when we're changing over, I could hear her talking and saying things. And this is at the time where they didn't have mics. So she was doing some trash talk in there, and I can't blame her, because I think the match was under an hour, and I won 6-1, 6-1, and it didn't matter what she did, and I knew this. It's like if she came to the net, I could pass her down line, cross court her over her head. If she stayed back, she wouldn't be able to out rally me. So there was nothing she could do, and the frustration, I believe, I saw it. Now that I understand she was retiring after this match, and many people told me later on that was one of her most frustrating losses ever, because she held Wimbledon and tennis in such a high regard, and then to go out like that, and that kind of, as some said, a pummeling, because it was such a devastating loss. I mean, had I known that it was her last match, maybe I would have given it to her, but I didn't know it. so she was kind of in trouble. But yeah, it was definitely one of the greatest highlights of tennis in my career. But not necessarily the greatest in sports for me, for sure. It was different.
Difficult in its own way. And just coming to the tour at that time, Andrea, at 14, 15, And once again, Billie Jean was over 20 years older than you. I mentioned Virginia Wade was 20 years older. Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova about a decade older. Your only real contemporaries at the top of the game, you mentioned Tracy Austin, Pam Shriver, about the same age. But what about being able to assimilate or being able to fit in at that time? I mean, here's this kid. It's one thing, here's the kid, but here's the kid that can beat us. Here's the kid that could take food off of our table as adult women. And also the fact that you came in at a time where not only were these adult women, they were icons of the game. You mentioned Billie Jean King, but she's the one who got it started, the Virginia Slims. She was the pioneer, the quintessential founder of women's tennis. What about that then? And as you think back now, is it more daunting when you think back now to the fact that you were just going out and it was, okay, next up, who's up?
Well, I look at it, and I did the same as a kid. I looked at it from both sides. I looked at my situation of, okay, I actually thought it was going to be like junior tennis. In my junior tennis era, people had fun. I mean, you went out, you had one racket or two rackets the most. It wasn't such a professional engagement. I mean, sports for kids in high school, it's $1 billion, junior sports is $1 billion industry. So it's very different now. But I looked at it as, okay, they have their role and I have my role. I also am a little bit more kind of like a male athlete in a team sport because I grew up playing soccer on a boys traveling soccer team. And they always watched my back and I watched theirs. We were a team. We had a camaraderie and we had a respect for each other. We kept the sport on the field, and then when you left, you were kids. And I expected that to happen when I went to pro tennis. I expected to play my match, and after the match, when you shook hands, you went to the locker room, and that was, you became the person again, not the tennis player, the person. I think that's much easier for male athletes to do because they have a lot more team sport engagement before they reach their pinnacle of their career. Whereas women's sports, they didn't have that. They were fighting to get even on the map. They were fighting for prize money. They were fighting for equality. They were fighting for so much that I think in their mindset, they forgot to realize they're fighting in the locker rooms too, in a sense, like the energy, the tone, the atmosphere, the backstabbing, the bureaucracy, the abuse of power. I mean, there was a lot of things that I tried to ignore as best as I could. I don't think I'd never wanted to fit in. Frankly, I never wanted to fit in. I never wanted to be like any of those top three because I didn't like their soul matchup. And I'm sure they didn't like mine. I mean, we all are different. I came in there, I wasn't trying to earn a living to make a mortgage or to, I had different mindsets because I'm younger, 20 years or 10 years. But I think the part that disturbed me the most, that I was shocked the most, I thought maybe it would be hard traveling because I still was in high school. I thought, okay, maybe it would be hard to juggle everything, or I get weary of the trains, the planes, the cars, the crowds, whatever. None of that ever bothered me. I thought the fans were phenomenal. I love them to this day. They were so good. I love the traveling. I love the hotels. I mean, room service, I still don't know how to boil an egg because I grew up on room service. But the thing that bothered me the most was the camaraderie. There was none. There was none. And it's an individual sport, so you can't expect it. But I did think that they would be able to compartmentalize and put things in a box and then become a normal human being after you shake hands. And I just, I didn't see that. And I think that was to the detriment of the sport, actually. I think it hurt the sport. Like you look at Rafa and Roger and what they do for the game, they elevate it in a way that people in every walk of life will remember them for their character. They may not remember like you. I mean, you have an incredible aptitude to absorb and even have an interest to look at information, but some may never remember anything about them other than their character. And that was the part that bothered me. I never fit in because our characters were different, not our games. Our games obviously were different. You have to expect that. But I remember every single day going back to my hotel saying to myself, I will never grow up to be like them, ever. And, and that's a big thing for a kid at 14 and 15 and 16 years of age when you watch people on TV and you see them as stars and then you get to know them and you're like, that's the last person I want to grow up to be. That's a hard thing to swallow, but that's what they had to do. They had to take that kind of mindset to succeed. I just chose a different way to succeed. I just chose a different methodology, and maybe because I came from a different generation or era.
And would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that in 1983, you moved on to the final against Martina Navratilova. You played her in the French Open final, and the year before, and you lost a tiebreaker in the first set, very close, very tight, and 6-1 in the second set, the deciding set in the French Open. And 25 years later, you came out and recounted the story behind the story about that final, just to give us the perspective and your insight that you did bring out many years later about what surrounded circumstances of you playing Navratilova there, center court, Wimbledon in the championship.
Well, obviously that story wasn't going to miss your radar, given how you know things. But two things on that. One, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw the piece this morning. Michael Phelps. There's an HBO documentary that's out today, and it's called Weight of Gold, and it's about Michael Phelps. I haven't watched it yet because it comes out tonight. And Michael Phelps talks about for Olympians how difficult it is to train your whole life for a moment in sports, and some of those athletes, Olympians, and I'm an Olympian, and some of those Olympians work so hard and they fought depression and even had some suicidal situations, and he talks about that. Some of them talk about it frankly, and it's good to have those kind of shows because it goes into the mindset of the athlete, because most people think you just play your sport, you go out, you win or lose, and that's it. And that nobody should ever complain because you're making millions of dollars. And I get that part because I am a spectator. I love sports. So I agree with that part. Professional athletes really have nothing to complain about, because if they look at their life compared to the people who are paying for those tickets to come watch them, they need to watch their mouth a little bit, because those fans are working hard to go watch them. They're paying good money to go see them. So some complaints of life they have to handle. And it's one of the reasons why I never said anything for so long on that situation with my Wimbledon final, is because as a professional athlete, I just, try to respect the game in a certain way. And I just was in a situation where it was difficult as a teen to navigate. And I had beaten Martina in the tournament before on grass at Eastbourne, and I was playing phenomenal. We just talked about my semis. But you never know what's going to happen in a match. Everybody, you wake up one day, you're not playing great. But what happened with my final is the day before my final, my dad was, as we talked about, a fantastic coach. But we lost the father-daughter relationship. You have to give up something. We didn't have that anymore. We just had coach-daughter, which was fine. I'm a professional athlete. I'll take it. I'd rather have that at that time. That's what I thought. That's what he thought. And that's what we did. And we didn't realize what we lost. But the problem was my father, bless his heart, in heaven as he is, decided to be a father the night before my final. And he came to me and said, and the only reason this story ever got out is someone watched my match and they said, I watched your match. This is 25 years later. And they said, you didn't try. And I respect reporters that do their work. I just do. And I said, no, I didn't. And she goes, I've watched this. What happened? Because you were playing terrific. You beat her the week before. What happened? And I figured after 25 years, no one would care. And she deserved the truth. And so I explained my father, and I just did it very lightly at that time. I just said, my dad and I got in a disagreement, which is true. And there was, a situation that occurred, and I ended up not trying in my finals because of the circumstance. So I gave kind of an abbreviated version. But what happened was my dad came to me and said, I heard from some of the other parents that have kids on the circuit, minors and kids that grew up on the circuit, that some things going on in the circuit that are making causing problems for the girls, the young girls. And he goes, I need you to tell me about them right now, or I'm pulling you from the Wimbledon final. And I was like, okay, so now you're going to have this conversation. So I just asked politely, and I've never defied my father. I just said, let's talk about it when we get home. And in one side of me, I was so relieved that finally, after all these years on the circuit, I could have a conversation with my family about some things that I felt horrible, horrific. And, but now wasn't the time. I was a professional athlete. I'm ready to play my final. Let's deal with family matters later. And he said, no, tell me now, or I'm going to pull you. And so I was in a dilemma at that situation. And so there's two aspects of the story, and Martina was in the flat next to me. And I thought, you know what? There's one side he's probably asking about what's going on, or there's some women that have certain kind of interests. And then there's probably the other side where is there any abuse going on? So there's two different tangents to the story. And I thought, well, if I can just give him one, maybe he'll be okay, and that's it. So I thought, this isn't my story to tell. I need to talk to Martina and see. Completely forgetting that, not forgetting that we have a final, but remembering I take tennis on the tennis court. I don't live tennis off the tennis court. I've never been that way. So she lived next door to me, knock on the door, or stay next door to me at the tournament. Ran to her door, and was thinking logically as a teenager, I'll just ask Martina, do you mind if I tell my dad some of the things that are going on in the circuit? Your choices are fine. I have no problem, your choices. You're not someone that's in abusive situation that I've encountered. But if I can tell him this part, maybe he'll be okay. And that was just my logic. It wasn't my story to tell. It was her story on that part of it. And I went, the person in her flat opened the door, and I went up there, and you walk up these stairs, and she was sitting across from the kitchen in this like little dining area and watching TV. And she turned and looked at me, and I'm kind of upset. I had not a lot of tears because I don't cry much, but you could tell I wasn't like happy-go-lucky. And she turned around, looked at me, saw that, and turned back and watched TV. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, oh my gosh, I forgot this is the women's professional tennis circuit. These people take their tennis to a different level. They take it home. And I thought, now I've just disrupted the person's concentration who I'm playing in the finals tomorrow. I need to leave. I need to leave immediately because sportsmanship is like important to me. And I want to make sure that however she's concentrating for the final, she has that final. I don't want her to feel sorry for me. I don't want her to be upset about what had happened. I just need to go. So went in the kitchen, and the person that had let me in had said, Andrea, you don't look okay. Are you okay? And I go, not really, but I don't think Martina wants to talk about it. This isn't the time for her either. Can I just use your phone to call a cab? And that was it. I left her place. I got in a cab. I walked around to try in the restaurant area to find people that I could talk about on the go-to tour and say, look, I need to talk to my dad about this. He deserves the truth. There's some really abusive power, some horrible things that I've encountered. I'd like to talk to him about it. He wants to talk about it tonight. And how do I handle this? You're the PR people, you're the media people, you're the director. How do I handle it? So I went and found one of those people in a restaurant, saw them in the restaurant, and she was in a personal circumstance at the restaurant.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. And then, so I kept trying to find someone to go, this is a unique situation. How do I handle it? How can I handle it and still play the Wimbledon final? And realized I couldn't go back to my flat. This happened in the evening. I couldn't go back. And so if I didn't go back to the flat, then I wouldn't have defied my father. He didn't have me in front of him to say, okay, tell me now, or I'm going to go, I'll pull you from the final. So long story short, I just kind of traveled around all day, didn't go back. And then the next morning, went and got my tennis stuff, didn't warm up for the match. And my logic said, I can't try in this match. If I win, Martina can go and say, Andrea came over here and disrupted my concentration, and now I'm the villain. Now I'm a villain who's a horrible person who ruined her concentration for a Wimbledon final. And I'm like, character's more important than winning Wimbledon for me. My dad shouldn't get in trouble for this one because he didn't do anything, and she might blame it on my father because it might come to, well, my dad asked me a question, and I'm like, I'm not going to blow up women's tennis today. I'm just not. I'm not going to be that person. And so I didn't try my Wimbledon final, and my dad knew it and never asked me the question again, unfortunately. He never did. And I went home and I went to the press conference, and I knew in the match, I'm like, okay, if Martina gets ahead, her confidence builds. So just let her get ahead. She'll start playing freely. She'll start playing better. When you get ahead of her, she kind of panics a little. And so I knew that. And then I let her get ahead. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, TV timeouts. I can't make this too easy for her because people pay for commercials. I need to make it a little closer in the second set because of TV commercials. And then that was it. Shook her hand, went to the press conference. No one asked me a question, so I never lied about the situation. They never asked me, did you try? They said, wow, Martina's really good on grass. And I said, you're absolutely right. She's great on grass. And left it at that. And 25 years later, someone contacted me and said, you didn't try. And so I answered them honestly and said, no, I didn't. And they said, why? And I said, I had a disagreement with my father. And, you know, that was my logic of, you know, I didn't want to be the person, certainly at Wimbledon, to have no Wimbledon be played, and then not only have no Wimbledon, because if I told my father some of the things I encountered, he would have pulled me, and I never would have played professional tennis again. The circuit would have been investigated. It would have been a disaster. And therefore, we were on such a great launch of so many fantastic things in women's tennis. I didn't want to ruin it for little kids looking up to people. I mean, that was, you know, when you think about when you're 17, 18 years old, what's your best logic? That was my best logic. And there was nobody else in the supportive system in that environment at that time that could have stepped in to solve it any other way. And such is life.
Even at that point, and I think this is a telltale of where you would end up, you were thinking of the bigger picture of the women's tennis tour and what that would have meant, what the implications were. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it's. I made a choice. It was a conscious choice. I just, you know, you wish things would have been different, but you look at America today, you look at the world today, and everybody is encountering, we wish the world would be different. And so you have to participate in the way the world can handle. And if it can't handle it, you need to have a supporting cast. And that's what's, you know, happening now is people are getting supporting casts and things. When you look at, you know, in some things in life, there's another extraordinary documentary about Olympians. And I'm an Olympian, but I'm not a true Olympian because I got to play professional tennis. So I was able to play Grand Slams 4 times a year. Olympians wait 4 years.
4 years.
To play one, to compete once. So I'm honored to be an Olympian, but I was able to do my sport. And so when I look at this document, you know, I haven't watched a documentary with Michael Phelps, but I can understand what they go through only in their perspective. I'm a visitor to that film. The documentary of Athlete A about the women's gymnastics, I mean, talk about waiting 4 years and then you're encountering that your entire 4 years, your entire 8 years, your entire 12, 16 years. You know, there's a lot of work to do in this country. And there's a lot of work to do in the world, certainly for child athletes. You know, some made it out okay mentally and emotionally and physically, and some didn't. And that's education. We need to educate our adults better on how to be around children. That's for sure. That hasn't changed.
No, that has not changed. It's only, I think, been solidified even more so with some of the things that have come to light. And you mentioned about the fact that I want to ask you a tennis question before I want to ask you about really kind of the turning point for you in your life in terms of a revelation that you had, an epiphany that you had. Another intriguing aspect of tennis is the services. And you mentioned about preparing to play, much different to prepare to play across the circuit of the Grand Slam tournaments. And you'd beaten Martina in one of the preliminaries in England on grass, same surface as you played in Wimbledon. What about being able to master, something I've always wanted to ask somebody at your level, about being able to master the different surfaces, which is so different from the clay of Roland Garros to the hard courts of the U.S. Open to Wimbledon on the grass, and how you managed to do that, and the fact that you enjoyed success at all the tournaments right across the board.
I was fortunate, I think, because of maybe playing indoor tennis in Chicago because of the winters. I had already the ability to switch surfaces very quickly. If I would have grown up on clay, it might have been more difficult because sometimes clay court players have a harder time on grass, for instance. But because of how I grew up training indoors, and then when it was outdoors, it was on hard courts, I had always an easy time on grass, on carpet indoors, on clay, on any type of surface. It was always easy. I also think it's, preparation. My dad always said I had very good instinct and I had very good quick feet, quick mind, and that helps you adjust on those surfaces. And also I could run all day, so for me on clay, I could run all day. On grass, I could adjust and stay lower down. I mean, you just have the understanding of what you need to do specifically for that surface. And those were always very easy adjustments for me.
There was a moment, I want to see if you remember what that moment was. See if you can recount that moment. I don't know the answer to this question, but you talked about the fact that you had opportunity, you had free time on the tour, and you chose to spend that free time, or began to spend that free time, visiting hospitals, and some specific to pediatric. I mean, kids that were some terminally ill, cancer patients, etc. Do you remember what was the first hospital? Or you remember the first time that happened where you were? I was just very curious to know if there was one. Well, I remember we were on tour and I was in Indianapolis, or where it happened to be. I just was wondering that.
I was on the East Coast in New York, New Jersey border, and Helen Hayes Hospital was one of the first hospitals I went to. And it was as simple as I don't have my driver's license and I'm in invitation cars, and I passed a toy store and I said, you know what? Those kids don't want to be in a hospital. I get to choose what I do. I get to choose going to play tennis, and I'm going to go and bring toys. I'll be like Santa Claus to these kids in the hospital. And that was one of my first hospital visits. I had been visiting kids on street corners and runaway kids and other types of kids in other cities, because when you play late at night, which was the hardest thing for me to just do early on in my career, but when you play late at night, you finish late at night. You do your press, you're going back late. So some cities I would see kids 10, 11, 12 years age at street corners, and I didn't understand that. And so I started visiting with those runaway kids, trying to, get them help. The hospital visit was an amazing experience because it was my first situation of knowing how important it is to educate, again, adults on a kid's mindset. And when I went in there, I thought we were just going to play and have fun and, play the games that I got. And the adults didn't understand what was happening. They said, oh, well, you can just leave the toys here. And I said, no, I want to play with the kids. And they go, why would you want to play with sick kids?
I'm a kid too.
And I said, because we're kids, we're kids. I don't care if they're sick. And so they're like, are you sure? And they knew who I was. They knew me from the headlines of their newspapers. And so all of a sudden it was the funniest thing, because kids were coming in the playroom and they had these glass, kind of the windows, and they saw us playing and laughing and having the time of our lives. But all of a sudden, all these adults were lined up watching us. And the look on their faces, I remember the look on the kids' faces. I'll always remember that forever as well. Because one of the kids, he had a disease and he had lost his hand. So when we played video games, I didn't want to play against him because I didn't want to beat him. Beating someone in anything is never a victory for me. It's like, really, what is that going to do to improve the quality of life in the world? But so I certainly didn't want to do it to a little boy who was stuck in the hospital. And he looked at me and he said, well, I bet you I can beat you in video games. And so I was like, okay, let's play. And I would play my heart out as hard as I could. And he beat me every single game. And, at first I was like, okay, I'll just let him beat me. And then I'm like, I'm trying as hard as I can now. And I was thinking, this kid he doesn't have all the people cheering him on for what and he's in a hospital. And yet he's finding a way to find joy. And then the kids, there was another little girl, she was connected to an IV pole, and we figured out a dance routine she could do with her IV pole. Another girl lost her hair from cancer, and I was telling her, you know, look, it's like, I gotta wash my hair, I gotta brush my hair. Having long hair is not like the cool.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So we had all this camaraderie, and we were laughing and laughing, and all these adults came and were watching. They started coming because they didn't know what was happening in their hospital. And at least 7 adults told me when I left, and they said, it's the first time we've heard laughter in our hospital. And that shocked me, because I was like, you think children and laughter is the same thing. And that's what makes the world go round, in a sense. And so that's what my mentality was. And so I remembered that. I'm like, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to help kids that are stuck in a hospital. At that very moment, I never thought I was going to stay with professional tennis the rest of my life. I would have liked to stay longer, but circumstances were different. But I knew at that moment that when I grow up, I'm going to help kids that are stuck in the hospital, that I'll do it the rest of my life, because I realized that I could do something to make a difference, because people didn't understand these kids are allowed to laugh. They're allowed to play. Yeah, they're sick, but let's let them have as much of their childhood as they can. So it's been like that ever since, ever since that day.
What was that? The time that you recall, I wasn't sure. Was that the first time? Was that when you were playing at Madison Square Garden? Was that a different occasion?
That was a different one. Madison Square Garden was when I went.
When you got reprimanded afterwards.
Yes.
I mean, that must have been a bit of a realization for you. I mean, I couldn't believe that story when I saw that. My goodness.
That was a horror show in itself. I was playing Madison Square Garden, which you grow up as a kid, and there's, I followed sports, Olympics and Madison Square Garden. You saw things. The Super Bowl. I knew I could never do the Super Bowl, but Madison Square Garden, I'm playing Madison Square Garden. Are you kidding me? So I was playing, and after one of my matches, I saw in the paper, because back then you didn't have Google, there was no internet, there's no cell phones. And I saw in the paper that kids in White Plains, New York, there was cluster suicides going on in a high school. And I just was like, what? These kids are my age. And I knew my world, no one understood me. And so with these kids, if they're struggling that deeply, maybe someone their age could help them. And I thought, I can talk to the adults and I can talk to the kids, and maybe I can help. So I went in the yellow pages and the white pages and got the school's number, went to the landline in the hotel, called the school and said, look, I have a day off in between my matches here. Would you like me to come visit the kids? I'm happy to come. And they were so excited, the student council, the school, and went there, arranged my transportation, got there, visited, did a PSA, visited with grieving family members, kids that have lost, 1 second they're in a class, the next second a child has killed themselves. So they're dealing with this kind of struggle and pain and suffering. And we spent the day together. I went back to my hotel. I never told anyone. The whole thing I did on the circuit, I never told people, hey, let's, I asked the tour, let's start a charity program. They didn't want to, and that's fine. I respected that, but I'm doing it on my own. So the next day I got called into a hotel room by the WTA, the media director and the number 1 player in the world. And they said, you have to quit doing that. And they threw this newspaper at me, and it hit me in the chest. And my first inkling was, I got to quit questioning those line calls, because we didn't have Hawkeye back in my age. So, that was different. So, and I looked at the picture, and I'm like, it was my picture, and I had been in White Plains, and the comment was like, teenage sensation Andrea Jaeger could be shopping on Fifth Avenue. Instead, she's helping our kids. Isn't that great? It was kind of that message. And I said, oh yeah, I was in White Plains helping the kids. And they said, you have to quit doing that. And I said, I don't think you understand. And I explained why I was there. I explained what happened, went through it all. And they said, no, you have to quit doing that. You have to stop it. And I said, okay, I don't think you understand. Even if you have no heart, which I know you both don't.
You're proving that.
What about on the business side? We go to these tournaments, and every single tournament we go to, our prize money comes from those people that come in the stand, that care about our sport, that sponsor our sport. What about for them, their community? I said, no. I said, no. And I tried as hard as I could, and they said, you have a choice. You either play on our circuit and quit helping kids, or you help kids and quit the circuit. And I'm like, I don't think you can do that. And they go, yeah, we can. And I said, oh. So I was like, okay, this isn't good. So I left the hotel room and I said to God on the way to the elevator, you decide. You know, one of my commercials just ran during the Oscars. I was, you know, loving the traveling. I hated the circumstances of an uninvolved tour. Okay, that's, I guess, the best way to put it, unevolved. But I love the training. I love the traveling. I love the competition, you know, that part of it, tennis in general. And so I said, you know, God, you decide. If you want me to play tennis full time, I'll do it without helping kids. If you want me to help the kids full time, let's go do that. Whatever you decide, I will do. And that was in March '84. And 2 months later, 3 months later, because it was May '84, I'm playing on center court at the French Open. I'm up 5-0 in the first set, and my shoulder pops. And then I go to hit a serve, and I thought like Jaws had taken my shoulder, because it was like, and I thought, you know what? God decided He wants me to help kids full time. And that's when I knew, okay, that's what I'm going to do now. My tennis is my tennis. They've made a ruling, and I'm going to just go play tennis. Again, I'm not going to make a big announcement about this, because it's going to hurt the circuit, and the circuit is on the way up, and I don't want to demolish it in my situation. And so I'm just going to go and do as God shares and lays a path, and go help kids full time.
And amazing how God can take a hand in those situations. And most definitely in your situation, where it was just a couple, I didn't know exactly what the timeline was, but that was just a couple of months after.
Yeah, and then it was interesting because, like, I mean,
Amazing.
I was playing phenomenal, and then my shoulder popped, and I had some of the best surgeons in the country working on
7 surgeries.
Yeah, and the best surgeons, and they and it was interesting because they just couldn't get it fixed. And they couldn't keep, you know, they couldn't be in a situation of fixing my shoulder, and so in my era, you look back, and I was the first one to get a shoulder coil on an MRI. They didn't even have the coils for MRIs. But I look at my life and I say, wow, I got to go into this, you know, certainly I would have liked to play tennis longer and help kids same time. I mean, obviously I would have done so much more at that platform than having to do it without professional tennis. But when you look at people in general who are fighting for survival, and there's no cure, there's no treatment, or there's no anything. Mine was just an orthopedic injury, an orthopedic thing. So that's, you know, that's something that I was able to move on from.
And when you talk about moving on, I think that's a bit of an understatement in terms of what the direction that you were most definitely and led to and have focused on now. We're looking back over 3 decades, but the original decision that you had, did you have something specific in mind, Andrea, for the vision that became the initial place in Colorado? Was that something, you know, this is what I want to do, this is how it's going to be done, this is what it's going to look like? Was that something that you had in your mind at the time, or did it just evolve a little bit more organically?
Oh, of course I had in my mind, just from all the experiences that I encountered, I wanted to do long-term care. And the main reason for it was anything that happens in life doesn't come for one moment, doesn't come for 1 second. There's pain and suffering that you need to support throughout. And I kind of knew that as a kid, and I wanted to create like peer groups also for kids. So if I brought out, you know, if I ran a program for 20 kids with cancer, I want to make sure they had friends. They had, you know, I grew up on a circuit where there was nobody to help me through my trials and tribulations. That had nothing to do with the game of tennis. It had to do with the life of tennis. And so I wanted these kids, you have cancer, or you have cystic fibrosis, or you have sickle cell anemia, or whatever you have, whatever your condition is, or you're poverty stricken, whatever your condition is, what we're going to do is give you the best and have you live full even with that. So we'll set up a friend network, a peer network. We'll bring in experiences where your focus isn't on the tragedy, your focus is on life and living it full, and giving those experiences and opportunities and rewards and accomplishments. And that's what, you know, we ended up doing. So we ended up, you know, our mission statement is to provide long-term care and a better quality of life for children with cancer and children in need. And so we do that by a variety of ways. And that's been since the original 35 years ago.
When did you really come to the realization that something, as you've articulated from an early age, that began as FUN really became WORK for you to have a completely different track to your life? Was there one particular moment there, or was it, once again, was this just something that was evolving as you've talked about over time, and it was, now I know the direction that God is going to take me in my life?
I think it's really important for anyone, regardless if you're a child or an adult, how you've come across something that you are going to put your attention to, your time, treasure, and talent to. Is it, how you go there is also how you can maintain it and thrive and rise with it. And so in my situation, tennis training isn't always fun. It's not. You can have blisters, you can hurt, you can miss balls, you can not play great, you can lose. There's a lot of things. And so I never say, well, we're going to make your life fun in a sense. It's, we're going to give you a better quality of life. And I think that that's important in people in general, because sometimes what you accomplish is hard work. But when you accomplish it, it's so fun to realize the journey was worth it. The journey was incredible or extraordinary. And that, I knew that at a young age. I knew that, I'm going to have roadblocks while I'm on this professional tennis circuit. I'm going to have roadblocks. I'm 35 years in this foundation. It's not getting easier. It gets harder every year. So it's not as if, we have all the financial funding we need. It's not as if they found cures for all these diseases or circumstances. And it's not if there's less circumstances or data showing, all these improvements. It's a tough world. And so it is work. I mean, I get up at 4 a.m. and start work. That's life. But how you treat what you put in is the determination of whether you have fun or enjoy the experience or be excited about the return, in a sense. Because if you're of service, I think it's a lot easier to find joy when you're doing something of service. So I've always had that benefit.
Have you always felt, once again, going back to an early age, that you were being judged in terms of society by a completely different set of standards, and then eventually came to the realization that this is why I have to make this break? I mean, I had read one account that said after your injury and it appeared that you wouldn't be able to come back, and you must really get a kick out of this one and a big smile on your face. You weren't going to be a contributor to society anymore after your injury. You were washed up and you were done at 21, and just what could you possibly do with your life? I mean, that's one of the most comical observations I think I've ever read when you look at the sum total of what's happened in the last 35 years.
Yeah, I've had many of those circumstances where just one of the most prominent reporters in tennis in the world came up to me and said, "You will never amount to anything ever again now that you don't play professional tennis." And I just, I looked at him and I was surprised. And again, it comes to mentality. How will you take information someone gives you? Do you put it through a processor? And I was fortunate to put things through a processor. And to me, I knew he was wrong. I wasn't going to take that information and fail. I knew he was less evolved in what I had already known about a bigger picture in life. And that person came back to me, I think it was like 20 years later, and said, you knew it all along. I'm so sorry. And, do you want to wait? Do you want to be the person that someone says something or does something and then 20 years later they get it? No, of course. You want them to get it at that moment. But if the circumstances is the circumstance, what can you do? I mean, I've had, I've had someone on the pro circuit say, how horrible it was that I even gave my money to help kids, because that was stupid, because I'll end up broke and the kids will end up dead anyway. where do you find your mission and your service? And each of us has, like, I won't understand that person's level of service. I won't understand what their calling in life is, just as they may not understand mine. I wish people did. It would have made it easier for me on the pro circuit, for sure. It would have made it easier as a woman in a pioneering field in what I did with starting the foundation. That hasn't been an easy track. It's been, a very uphill battle continually, because to get your message out is hard sometimes, because, you're protecting one industry while you're trying to say, help me in another side, And so it's, it's one of those things where you just do the best you can and hope, make a difference. And I know we have, and we'll continue doing that. And that's what, I look for.
Some 20 years, now you're 35 years in with the initiative that you took on after your tennis career. Some 20 years in, you made the decision to become an Anglican nun. Now, I've led a very sheltered background as a Roman Catholic. I didn't know the Anglicans had nuns until this is my, I'm admitting to that here. But I know that there's very close association between the Episcopal Church and the Catholic Church. But when we first brought to my attention, I said, oh, wow, an Anglican nun. So they've got nuns too. But as far as the decision that you made, I believe that was back in 2006. How did that come about, where I guess you certainly took your faith and your belief to another level to make that commitment?
Right. That was definitely a step. I mean, internally and in my own little world, I had been studying. I received a degree in ministry training and theology. I was dealing with end-of-life issues with kids all the time. And so you're dealing with a whole different set of information, and you want to study and you want to research and you want to get as much knowledge as possible. I was in a particular situation at the time where I knew I was called to it, but then there was also, they were trying to get lay people involved in being religious sisters and religious brothers because they had a decline in those. And it just fit in my circumstance. I was never going to tell anyone. I never was going to tell anyone. And it was, and I figured, okay, I only have to wear my habit at like certain convocations or certain situations, and they may not know it's me. And so I had it all figured out. I had it figured out. Nobody would know. And unfortunately, a People magazine reporter had called me and asked me about Chris Everett's divorce. And she had done a story on the foundation before and asked, and I said, you know what, even if I knew, I didn't know she was getting divorced, even if I knew she was, I would not have a comment on that. That's not the right thing to say about somebody. I would never do that, even if I knew of it. And so the lady said, well, how about you? How's everything going? And I said, oh, great. Still running the foundation. And then I got off the phone, and then I thought, what about if the only reason I did this is because God wanted, like that person had said a prayer before and said, God, if you give me a message, I will continue my life faithfully. And what about if I was embarrassed to tell her? And because of that, that message was lost. If I had a responsibility to that. And so my whole situation of keeping this hidden for my entire life was just changed in that moment. And I called the person back up and I said, I don't know if you've been having a prayerful situation or what's going on, I went that route. And I said, but I just became a sister. And before I could even hang up the phone, she said, we're sending a reporter and a photographer at the phone. And I just was like, and I didn't want to do it. Didn't want to have anything to do with going public. But then I thought, am I slapping God's face by not wanting people to know? Is this going to, help somebody somewhere in the world? And I'll do it because I knew the backlash I would get, because it's, some people that's too far out there. It was already far out there for me to be a pro tennis player at 14. It was far out there for me to start a children's foundation with my own money. So I couldn't even imagine what, but I can have an inkling what would happen. And so I went through that and did it publicly. And then unfortunately, it interrupted some of the convocations. It was hard on the order. Like they had never had a public figure as an order and someone order. And convocations kept getting scheduled on certain things that I couldn't control dates of. And so I didn't want to miss any. And the order said, you're doing God's work. Of course you can miss convocation. Well, they had sisters that had missed in 52 years. I mean, I'm not going to take a pass. And so I retired my title, and it's basically the same work, same prayer, same service, same life. It's just, I didn't want to have the title. So in a sense, I'm doing it privately.
Privately, yeah. And you mentioned there was, I'm sure that was a conflict at the time when you called back. You'd already made that commitment spiritually between you and God, and it was a matter of being public with it. And
I literally just been ordained, so I had gone
really just after the process. Yeah,
I had gone through the whole process, because you don't just decide one day to become one.
Right.
I had
Right.
gone through this whole process, gone through the whole thing, and it was literally like that week. And I just went, "Are you serious? Come on, God, give me a break here." So anyway,
Chris had a nerve getting divorced. What the heck is she doing to me to get this phone call? It's all her fault.
If she hadn't, it would have been fine.
Exactly. Exactly. And that was after, a whole different type of training. You had best part of a year, 9 months training, study, and then taking the vows. And now, as you mentioned, you're certainly, you're practicing it with your foundation and all that entails. And your great hero, I noted, and was a saint that I do have a little bit of familiarity with. St. Catherine of Siena was the saint that I guess is reflective of the direction that your life has taken. I wasn't surprised when I read St. Catherine of Siena, because I do have a peripheral knowledge of St. Catherine of Siena. It all seemed to fit with you, Andrea.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I was studying the saints for like decades, and it was just, and I didn't grow up studying the Bible. My parents didn't go to church. It wasn't like that at all. And so I had to learn.
You were at the Church of the Servant Volley.
Yeah, exactly. So I had to learn all that later in life. And because I graduated high school and while I was on the circuit, but I didn't get the same college experience as most people. So I ended up, going to college later and receiving my degree in theology and ministry training. But when you have something that you get to connect to the saints, it's just, it is life-changing. I mean, for me, it was, and I felt so bad when I resigned my title, and I went in a lot of prayerful moments in it. And then I got the message, God knows, God doesn't need me to have the title to do what I'm doing. I'm doing it anyway. So I was comforted with that, but I often check in with St. Catherine and go, "Hey, are you cool? Are you still cool?"
Still talking to me, right?
Yeah. There's something, when you have faith and a mission and a calling, those things stay lifetime. They're in you. It's as if you're breathing. And so this stuff has to be, you don't want to, they have to be lived. It has to be lived. Otherwise you feel incomplete. That's the way I can put it.
Indeed. And St. Catherine of Siena, it's been a great deal of time tending to the sick, and was also, I believe there was a quote from you that said, "A rebel that was always in people's faces telling them the truth." So that's a role model. That's a mentor to inspire you.
Yes. No, she all the saints have been through the ringers. I mean, you look at something like Padre Pio, what he went through just to have knowledge. I mean, here's to the guy, and he's just trying to help you out. So it's like, it's there's a lot of wonderful things that come when you have saints that you are connected to.
You've gone through now, once again, 35 years removed, with all that you've done, and literally thousands of kids and thousands of people that you've connected with and that you've been able to help. And there's always been this issue, I know, a biblical phrase about understanding and being understood. And that's always been something that you've had to deal with, tennis tour, society in general. But as far as your family, that was an issue in terms of the decisions you made, but you did have an opportunity and have had the opportunity, thankfully, to reconcile with your family with these decisions and the direction that your life has taken. And I was very heartened to hear that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I was on the circuit, the Grand Slams were amazing because I was able to interact, and I don't know why, but like John McEnroe has always taken me in as like a younger sister to him, and Borg treated me as one. And these players were incredible when you're there, but you want to have your family understand you. That's the important part. And if they don't, you deal with it, but it's like, okay, it would be easier. And my parents never understood why I quit visiting them over the holidays, and their Christmas presents kept getting to be less and less. And finally I said, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm helping these kids. And they still didn't really understand it because they grew up, they knew so much of me from the public. And I think there's no manual for a parent to deal with a child prodigy. There's no manual for someone to deal with a child, let alone, just how to raise, how to be, how to love. And that's unfortunate because they tried their heart out, but I was never understood even as a kid because it wasn't as tennis came easy to me, winning came easy to me. The training was hard and all that. So you're going to have people that adore you for no other reason than that. That's not necessarily healthy. So you want to have, I always kept myself separate from people who praised me. And because of that, I always was able to keep myself separate from people who criticized me. And so my values came from above rather than around. And so it was the same thing for my parents. If my parents said good match, or they said good grades, nothing against them. I had an internal peace with, okay, good match, good grades. It wasn't as if I needed theirs. And so when they didn't like what I was doing with starting the foundation, because they didn't understand it, it was okay because I had already built up this whole different kind of relationship. And that was with the public at large as well, because no one understood it. John McEnroe was the first person to donate, and he helped people understand this is a good thing Andrea is doing. What are you guys doing? Help her. I mean, come on. And that was, that was like a leap of faith for him, because back then nobody was doing this kind of stuff. It just wasn't common. Some people do it now because of community, responsibility, but this is just what I'm doing. So when my dad passed away of a brain tumor quite some time ago, and he got to see the kids. And when he was diagnosed, he was like, at least I lived my life. These kids are barely getting their 12th birthday. And so he went at one of our award ceremonies, and I've only seen my dad cry twice. And once was when I was injured, and the other time was at one of our award ceremonies. And he said, Andrea, I could never be more proud what you're doing for these kids, and how these kids, it's like no tennis trophy can ever compare to this. And that is something that meant a lot, because he got these children's struggles. I never needed someone to understand. I mean, do I ever want someone to understand my struggles? Sure. Right? You would like to have some, whatever it is, of what I had to go through. I shouldn't have had to go through what I went through on the women's professional tennis circuit. Shouldn't have. They should have been a little bit more educated, a little bit more evolved. It would have been great. I would have loved to be on the men's circuit at the time. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay. It didn't work out that way. I could have played 20 more years maybe, but such is life. But I think in the grand scheme of things, you want people to be accountable to their behavior. And that to me is more important than someone approving of me. You may not understand what I do, but don't stop me from what I'm doing if it's for the goodwill of others. If it's for the humanity of others, get out of my way. And if you can't get out of my way and you stop me, there's a problem with you, and someone else should be stopping you. And that's important. That would be more important than coming full circle. So for my parents not to have loved what I was doing because they didn't understand it, that would have been no big deal. I was happy he did understand it because it helped him get through his cancer later. In that situation. My mom loved it, and she got it later too, but that wasn't important for me. If like one person said, "Oh, did you start this to get your childhood back?" And I was like, "Are you kidding? Who gets up at 4 a.m, fundraises, goes through the," no offense, they have no idea how difficult this role is and this job is, and what you have to deal with. you don't do that to get your childhood back. It's like, and so that's a whole other area.
No, indeed. You mentioned about I think the two operative words in today's society. You just mentioned one of them, and it's accountability and entitlement are the two words that always come to mind for me, and what category people fall into for the most part. It crosses my mind every day in so many different circumstances.
Yeah, they're important words, and I think we're working on a project now that, I mean, we do all age groups, but we're working on a big project for 4 to 7 year olds, because that's a very prominent time where kids make their mindsets. They decide how they're going to be in later life. And that's important, because sure, it's important to change kids, and we work with all age groups, and we want to educate, inform, and create awareness. But you also want to make citizens of humanity and have goodwill increase, you want to have kindness increase, you want to have people living, the fullest of their quality of life, and understanding, what morals are, and values, and boundaries, and things like that, and safety. We're on our 35th year and have had a perfect safety record with children. And, maybe I had to go through what I went through to make sure of that. I don't know, but it's important to pay attention, to do your own, checklist of things. It's not easy, but it has to get done.
Just a couple of final questions. I think I know the answer to this one. If you're advising parents out there, opportunity to play an individual sport as opposed to a team sport, I think you have an opinion on that, and a rather informed opinion on that.
Definitely team sport. I mean, I grew up playing. They didn't have a girls' soccer team, but I played a boys' soccer team, traveling soccer team, and like I said, all those boys were just amazing. Any of the other teams that came in that were like, "Oh, you have a girl on your team," and they're like, "Yeah, how cool are we?" That was the kind of character
Supportive.
of those kids. So definitely team sports. Nothing against it, but you look at, Andrea Agassi and Steffi Graf. I mean, their child's going into baseball. He's a phenomenal baseball player. He's going to attend college, I think, at USC. So you would think of those two, but each person has their path, and that's the other part. Give them their path, because if someone's meant to be in an individual sport, then they're meant to be. You just support them in ways a little bit different than if they're in a team sport.
The Silver Lining Foundation, and you mentioned John McEnroe was a pioneer, and thankfully many others in the world of entertainment and sports have rallied to your cause. And once again, that's part of your effort. You mentioned the hard work that goes into this, but I think it's a testament to you, your personality, and your mentality, that you've been able to cultivate so many relationships that have supported your efforts, and hopefully you're going to continue to support them for many, many years.
Oh, absolutely. We did change the name from Silver Lining Foundation to Little Star Foundation, mainly for the fact that, when kids pass away, what's the silver lining for those parents? We want them to look at, a lot of kids would look in the sky and want to wish upon a shooting star. They want to see the stars in the sky. And so that's a representation that if your child is here or, in heaven above, that they can look in the stars. So we did change that to Little Star Foundation. But yeah, I mean, I never envisioned that I would have come across so many extraordinary people, because you're so trained to go, tennis and have those paths open. I just thought I was going to be at home working, really hard. And I didn't realize doors would open, like opportunities like you and I get to meet because of my work at the foundation. Maybe it's tennis, but there's some things like Nelson Mandela came to visit me and thank me for all my work. And, you go, wow. And, I've had people that I've been on a plane when we used to travel a lot on planes, and, they go, oh yeah, I recognize you. And I go, yeah, I used to play professional tennis. And they go, no, you're the one that helps kids.
That's a twist. Yeah, absolutely. Welcomed.
But yeah, I've had the fortune of several of the really amazing people that I knew have passed on. A lot haven't, but like Paul Newman, for example, Ted Forstman, who just did an incredible amount of things for kids. Paul is, there's no one like Paul, for sure. miss him and Eddie every day.
The Little Star Foundation, and I'm going to let you here as we wrap up, Andrea, just tell folks how they can support your foundation. I wanted to come right from you in an opportunity to extend that to everybody that follows the games people play.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Well, obviously, if someone has the means and is interested in donating, they can go on our website, which is www.littlestar.org. We also know that people are, life is life right now. There's can be a lot of struggles going on. And if you can't make a financial donation, prayers are awesome. We love prayers. We appreciate them. And in this vast world, someone always knows someone that can do something. And that's what connects us all. And so maybe, for whatever reason that we've all connected today, if it's to help Little Star, if it's to remember your own tennis game or sports, or just be a fan of sports, but just to know that we all are together in this, in life, and to stay well, stay happy, live your best life, and certainly, thanks for having me on the program. I didn't realize you'd know so many things.
Just,
I'm gonna get calls today. I have a feeling. Wow.
My family would have differed when my family was around. They would have said I knew nothing, but that's another story. I appreciate those kind words. And one quote, and I'll see if this in a summation that was attributed to you. It became difficult to reconcile the narrow-minded focus of a top tennis player with the desire to help others. You've certainly figured that out with a life of public service, charity, and philanthropy. I'm sure you still stand by that quote as your life has evolved now for the past 35 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it does every day. And it's, I'm honored that I get to do what I get to do. It's not an easy path. I kind of say, God, you could have just had me stub my toe or something. That would have been an easier way. But it's
not that simple.
No, it's not that simple. But it's like to be of service to God is just, you wake up every day and you're grateful for it, and whatever comes. I mean, one of my favorite quotes as well, it's not mine. It came from someone that was a prisoner of war, but said that suffering is not the worst thing that can happen. Disobedience to God is. And that's, something I've lived by as well, because you know that there is a world out there, and we hope we can all come together in thoughts and ideals. But the thing is, different ideas and different ideals make the world the way it is too. We're all different. We all have something extraordinary in us. Just let's all bring that extraordinary together for whatever way to benefit others.
Amen to that, Andrea. Andrea Jaeger, our guest here on the Games People Play. Once number 2 in the game of tennis, I'm going to give you a higher rating in the game of life. So I think I know there's only one place to go from number 2, and that's number 1. And it was a pleasure to spend the time with you. You played the game very well here in the Games People Play, Andrea. Many thanks for your time.
Well, thank you. You're extraordinary interviewer. Boy, I'm blown away.
I didn't mean to scare you. It took the episode 6 for me to scare a guest.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's great to see people care about history and people's, life in sports, because it's not just about on a win-loss sheet.
Indeed. And thank you to Andrea. Many, many thanks to Andrea. Really appreciate, once again, her time. And sponsoring our program, once again, the Little Star Foundation, founded by Andrea. And you can go to www.littlestar.org for more information about supporting their mission as they look to provide a better quality of life and long-term care to children, families, and communities in need. Programs, financial assistance, disaster relief and recovery, pediatric oncology, and general medical support, educational programs and scholarships, therapeutic arts, sports and animal therapy programs, basic care and outreach support. And once again, to help support the Little Star Foundation, you can make your donation at www.littlestar.org. Thank you to Andrea, and thank you to all the folks here at the Fours. Thank you to Phil Castanetti at Sports World, our great mentor. Thanks to Kirsten Kelly, and thanks to my executive producer, on site, keeping us in line, Andy Bernstein, and also the boys on the West Coast in Seattle, to Todd and Kiwan for their efforts. So, for the games people play, this is Bernie Corbett saying, play the game well.